All right, I'm making fun of the people who do all the clickbait intros. There's no hot single woman in this, it's just me. That is my dear friend Eva Rupert. If you want to see more of her, you can find her on several episodes of Discovery Channel's Naked and Afraid. One of the most cool, badass, and sweetest people I've ever known, and I'm honored to call her a dear friend. She and her boyfriend have this cute little boutique hotel down in Bisbee, Arizona, the Jonquil. If you're ever down there, you can find the Jonquil, Jonquil Hotel. I'll put a link in the description down below, or find her at evarupert.com. But anyway, it's just me, and I am going to show all, but show all on a bus. So somebody just recently pointed out that there was nothing out there, kind of a really basic beginner walkthrough of all the things on a bus. And so I tried to do that since we're experiencing a little flooding and I can't get out. Our road's actually washed out. So we went from record snow to now it's melting over the last couple days and flooded the property, moved all the beehives. But anyway, give me a chance to kind of walk through a couple buses and show you stuff. This is really basic. If you have a bus, if you've ever driven a bus, if you've ever seen a bus, you may not want this. But if you are new to this, follow along. Thank you. So let's approach like you are absolutely new to a bus. And we're going to go all the way around the outside of this one and the inside. And I'll show you parts of other buses as well, just because they're all different. So let's start at the front. These louvers up here indicate that there's a radiator, so this is a front engine bus. And this one has the engine underneath this doghouse here. So you'll hear doghouse and dog nose. The dog nose is what people use to refer to a conventional bus with the hood out front and the engine in the front. I'll show you that in a bit. This is a front engine bus. Sometimes people call it a puller as opposed to a pusher, a rear engine bus. But even though it's got a front engine, there's still a drive shaft that goes back to the rear axle, which pushes the bus. So I think the term puller is kind of stupid, but that's a personal thing. You call it what you want. Anyway, people refer to this thing inside as the doghouse, and that's the engine access cover. So on the front of this particular bus, you'll find the radiator fill. This is called a sight glass. So these things get cloudy and they're hard to see, but this lets you, if it's clear enough, measure or check the level of coolant in there, and you want to make sure you can see coolant. Now this one's not very convenient because if you take the cap off, you have to pour coolant in there, and the cap is level with the top here, so you got to get a hose and snake it in there. A hose on a funnel, kind of a pain. But anyway, these bars here, and again, this is really basic. I'm assuming you have never seen a school bus before. These bars and then these holes down here let you climb up to clean the windshield. So it's just a grab bar. Got your overhead flasher lights, the antenna. Those three marker lights are, they used to be called Michigan lights originally. I think they were required first in Michigan, but those three lights tell oncoming traffic at night that you are a wide vehicle, I think 8 feet wide. If you're over a certain number of inches wide, then you're supposed to have those. Got the bumper, the kid whacker. Bus drivers call them a kid whacker, but this swings out. You can remove that. That swings out, which forces kids to walk around the front of the bus far enough away that the driver can see. And then the bus also has these, which are called crossover mirrors. So a crossover mirror, crossover mirror lets the driver see down here in the front of the bus. Got your wipers. These are pantograph wipers, so they've got two arms so that the blade stays vertical all the way across. These are not usually synchronized, so you'll find you may even have separate switches for the driver's side and passenger side. And sometimes they'll go together and out, sometimes they'll be back and forth, but they are not generally synchronized, meaning like in a car, they both move simultaneously. Over here we got the door. We'll discuss that more later. Now, on this kind of bus, you actually are sitting in front of the wheels, in front of the steer tires and the steer axle. So it's a little odd to drive the first time you drive it, because you're going to go past where you think you should turn if you're in a car, because you're sitting up in front of the wheels. They also make it more difficult to tow. If you have to get one of these towed, they will ask you if it's, this style of bus, because the arm from the tow truck has to reach back farther than a regular conventional bus where the tires are closer to the front. Down here is your fuel fill, and this is a diesel. And these typically have a 2-inch threaded cap, and the cap will usually be on a chain. So that's a 2-inch pipe thread back there, and you can get locking caps for these. This is a single axle rear end. You'll see tag axles like I will show you right now. Now, if you get a coach or a transit bus, you might find, and even some of the school buses like the Crowns, this happens to be a Crown but was not a school bus, this has 2 axles in the back. And there are 2 different configurations of those too. You'll see that this front axle has dual tires on it. This one has a single tire. This is called a tag axle. This one doesn't do anything to help push you. The only drive axle is this one with the dualies. The tag axle is just to help support additional weight in the back of the bus. It's really not a very desirable thing if you don't need it, because that's an extra pair of tires, one on each side, an extra axle, more hubs, brakes, everything else, and it doesn't help propel you at all. But they look cool. Here's another example of tag axle. So single tire on the back, dual on the front, and these are the drive axles. So drive axle, tag axle, and this is a rear engine bus with the radiator back there. So single axle, dual tires. These particular tires are 11R 22.5. That's really common for a school bus. You might also, on the smaller ones, find 10R 22.5. These are 10 lug. Got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 studs and nuts holding this tire on. These are pretty standard semi-truck patterns. You'll see school buses that also have 8, but if you get one with the 10, it's really easy to find replacement wheels if you want to change tire size, if you have to find a new rim or something. Any semi-truck tire place will have these 10 lug. This is called a hand hole, and generally you'll have one valve stem on this side, and the normal process is to put the other one on the opposite side. So if I look in there, you'll see the other valve stem back there. So it's normal to have one on one side and then the inner one on the opposite side. If they mount that somewhere else where your inner valve stem is up here, obviously you can't get to it, and that would be wrong, and have your tire shop redo that. So anyway, I'll show you the kind of tire pressure gauge that you need in order to get on that. You need a special gauge and a special fill, the fill nozzle. I don't know, what do you call that thing? Anyway, that's straight, and you will find those at a semi-truck shop or any truck stop, really, roadside. If you go to the little coin-operated tire fill station at the front of a truck stop or gas station, it'll have this kind of air chuck on it, and this will work fine on your car, and it will work fine on maybe one of your bus tires, depending upon how they're set up, but it won't work on all of them. And if you try to check your tire pressure with a little gauge like this from a Target or any auto parts store, This one only goes up to 50 psi, and because it's angled like that, it won't work on all the tires. This one also won't work. It only goes up to 35 psi, and it's likely that your bus tires are going to be 85 to 110 psi, depending upon the loading. So you can get these, which are angled, and this allows you to get to that inner or the outer tire where the valve stem points in, and you reach in and then pull back. But because this is angled, it won't let you get to the other side of your dually, so this one won't work. What you need is one that's straight like this and angled. And I've never seen an auto parts store that has these, but any truck stop will have these. Now, this is the fill portion. I'll talk about that in a minute. But what about checking your tire pressure? You're going to have to go to a truck stop and get something like this. So this one has the reverse angle, and that's for the outside of the dual tire, where the valve stem points in. So you get in like this and then pull back on it and you check the pressure. And this one goes up to 150 psi. And then the straight one lets you get into the other side of the dually straight on like that. And then this one's just a little fancier. It's the same thing or same kind, except it's got this little glass eye down here and the mechanism is inside instead of popping out the back like that. So you can check your tire pressure with these, again, any truck stop. But what about filling it? If you go to the little coin-operated unit out front, first off, it spits out air at such an anemically slow rate that it'll take you forever, and they probably only go up to maybe 50 psi, so it's not going to work on your bus. If you go to the backside of the truck stop where the semi-trucks fill up, a couple of the pumps back there, a couple of the islands where the semi-trucks get diesel will have air fill chucks. They'll have a hose and it will have this on it, which allows you to fill the other side of the dually, the inner side that you can't reach except with the straight on. It has the reverse for getting the outer side of that dually. And these go up, I think they'll fill to 120 or 130 psi back there. And those are free. They don't charge. Now, be mindful that you are just cruising and there are people back there in semi-trucks working, and try to pick a time when they're not busy and don't occupy that lane for longer than necessary. But you'll find these at the truck stops. Anyway, this is what you'll need. Let's get back. You're not generally going to find one at your local auto parts store. Moving around the back, we've got the wheelchair lift. This was a handicap bus, and these doors will have interlocks, and that wheelchair lift will generally have an interlock. So if you open this, you may not be able to start the bus or release the parking brake more commonly, or take it out of neutral. Back of the bus, pretty standard. Nothing really fancy to show you back here. Now, this particular bus has spring suspension, and I'll show you one here right now that has airbag suspension. So this is what a bus with air springs or airbags looks like. So up there you'll see the brake canister, shock absorbers. That is an airbag or air spring more properly, because people confuse it with the airbag in your steering wheel for safety. And then there's another one over here. The shocks look really good. If you have airbags, air springs, sorry, you're going to have a thing called a leveling valve. And the leveling valve is connected to an arm. So this arm goes up to a little valve here. And so as it moves up and down, it turns this valve, which then varies the amount of air in these bags. Right now they're soft. So what'll happen is when the bus is started, air pressure will build up in the system. At first it will build up in your primary and secondary braking tanks. After it gets up to 60 to 80 psi, pounds per square inch, then it will start filling your auxiliary tank, and your auxiliary tank is what fills the air suspension. So it's pretty common if you have an airbag or air suspension bus to see you'll see the needle on your pressure gauge move up to a 60 psi pretty quickly, and it to stop there for 5 minutes or so. And the reason it gets to 60 and stops is because it fills up the primary and secondary tanks first, then it fills up the auxiliary tank and your air springs. So what'll happen is as air pressure goes into this airbag, both of them are connected together, it inflates them and pushes the body of the bus up. So as it pushes the body of the bus up, this arm, which is connected to the leveling valve, this arm keeps it in place, the body of the bus moves up, and this valve arm moves down. Once it gets to about level, then it shuts off the air, and no more air comes into the airbags. Pretty cool. And it's self-leveling like that. Now, self-leveling, I mean, based on load. So if it's got a light load, it won't put as much air pressure in here. You put a bunch of kids in here, or your water tanks and stuff, what'll happen is then it compresses these more, which pushes this arm up, which then lets more air in until it gets back level again. So slick system. Generally, you'll have 2 leveling valves in the front, 1 for each side, and 1 in the back that controls both sides. So you'll see the leaf springs back here, and they do not adjust for load or anything. So air suspension, airbag or air spring suspension is typically a little more comfortable, but these are really common. That over there is a shock absorber. This thing here is well, you get your rear axle, and that's the pumpkin, which has the differential, or is the differential, and that's got the drive gears in it from the pinion and ring gear from the drive shaft. So a bus with the engine in the front has a drive shaft that goes all the way to the front of the bus. And it goes back here. This is a brake canister right there. And there's one on the other side. These are spring brakes. And then this is an air brake system. I've got a video about spring brakes. You may find buses with hydraulic brakes. Sometimes they'll call them juice brakes. I really like air brakes on a full-size vehicle like this because the air brake system is super simple to work on, very reliable, and very safe. Because it's an air brake vehicle, it's got an air tank and an air compressor on the engine. And you're going to find that there will be drain valves. So you'll see, I'm getting dripped on. It's raining out here. You'll see little valves on the bottom. Like, well, there's one with a cable on it. But that valve there and that valve there. Now, this particular tank is segmented inside. It's one tank that actually has 3 partitions. And they were nice enough to put a drain cable. So you should pull this every day, and that pulls that little toggle over and releases the air in there, and water that condenses into the tank will blow out the bottom, and you should drain that water out regularly. Now, the others don't have the automatic or the cables on them because you don't have to do those as often, but your primary tank is where you're most likely to collect water. Here's the battery compartment. Looks pretty empty, doesn't it? Well, that's because this bus probably came with 2 really big batteries. They're generally equipped with a category or size of battery called an 8D, D like David or Delta or dog. So they'll have 2 8D batteries here in parallel. So they're both providing 12 volts together in parallel, which, provides more current capacity for cranking. But these buses really don't need 2 big 8D batteries. An 8D battery weighs about 120 pounds. They are a beast, and they would fit in there like this. So it's pretty common for school districts to replace them with a smaller size, a Group 31 battery, And 2 Group 31 batteries are generally all you need to start school buses, but they're designed from the factory with the 8Ds because they'll sit there for a long time, maybe idling, and the idle current may not be enough to charge these while they're running air conditioners and running the lift for the wheelchair back there. So they provide plenty of excess or reserve capacity, but all right, had to fix an audio problem there, sorry. Anyway, 2 Group 31 batteries are what you'll usually find in a school bus. Sometimes they'll put 3 in here. It's really common for them to have 3 and then before they sell the bus to take the 3rd one out, because really you only need 2. And you can find these at Napa or Costco or even Sam's Club. Most places will have Group 31 batteries available, but not all of them will have an 8D. Oh, back in here is a disconnect switch, and it's sort of hidden if you didn't know it was in here. This one, you flip it up, and now the batteries are connected, and you could start the bus. If you try to start and nothing happens, and it's like a new-to-you bus, look around for a disconnect. So it's pretty common for these buses to have phantom loads. They've got things hooked up like cameras, recorders, the sensors and everything, and they draw a little bit of current all the time. So it's really common to have, or a good idea to have, a disconnect switch. So you flip that down, now it's in the off position and nothing will drain out. These batteries can sit here for quite a while. If you can't start your bus, look for one of those. Front tires, now in the heavy truck tires like this, you got front and rear. These are steer tires and those are drive tires. And again, I know this is really basic, but that was the goal. When you go shopping for tires, you'll find that drive tires are not necessarily the same as steer tires. Now, they do make a 3rd category, all-position tires, and an all-position tire you could put anywhere. But a steer tire is designed to be mountable on the front. A drive tire should only be mounted on the rear of the bus and not on the front. If you have all-position tires, you can put them anywhere. Now, can you take that tire and put it up here if you have to? If you have to, sure, just be conscious of your speed and keep in mind that it is not really intended to be a steer tire. But you'll find that none of these have spare tires. But you've got 2 tires back here, 2 tires on the other side. In an emergency, if you've got a jack and a lug nut wrench, preferably get a torque multiplier. You can get them for about 70, 80 bucks. I've shown those in other videos on how to be self-sufficient with your tires on the road. If you lost a tire up front, you don't have to be stuck somewhere out in the middle of the desert, boondocking. You can jack up the front, take that tire off, block it, jack up the back, take one of those tires off, and put it on the front. Because, see, it's dished in this way right now, but it's the same rim, just facing the other way here. Get to where you can then safely change the tire with a new one. Up here is pretty common. That panel, if you find one, is the fuse panel for the bus. It's going to have all the fuses in there for the flashers, the relays, everything else. This one's got nice horns. Washer bottle access down here for your windshield washer fluid. All right, let's go inside. Come on inside with me. So they've ripped out the seats in this one. Let's start at the back. Wheel wells, you do not want to remove those. I've seen people take those, cut the metal out and put a sofa over it or something, or a little piece of plywood, trying to gain a little clearance there. And it is not really a good idea, because if you had a blowout of a tire, that tread will come whipping around and it can bust right through plywood. So keep these wheel wells, just deal with them. This is your rear heater, and sorry about the hay. Underneath this channel here are 2 coolant lines, and they're 3/4 or 1 inch coolant lines that go from that heater to this heater up to that heater there for the driver and then connect to the engine. And a lot of people take those out. I think it's a good idea to remove these because you don't really want these lines running through the middle of your bus. Eventually, one of those rubber hoses may develop a leak. And if it does, and you've got your whole build around here and cabinets built over it, now all that's going to end up on your flooring and your carpet, behind your cabinets. So I've seen a lot of misinformation. Yes, there's misinformation online.
You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
I see misinformation about people, or where people recently even have said, if you take these out, you've just reduced the amount of coolant capacity for your engine and it will overheat in the summer. And that is, to be honest, bullshit. So, yeah, there is coolant in these. And during the summer, if you did nothing, the engine coolant would be running through these lines, and these heat exchangers, which are really little radiators in boxes, those heat exchangers would be dumping heat. Even without the fan on, they would be hot, they would be leaking and dumping heat into your bus all summer long. So every single bus comes from the manufacturer with shutoff valves like these, so that you can shut it off in the summer. So obviously the intent is that the cooling system here, all that circuit, is shut off in the summer. It does not do anything when it's shut off to cool your engine. So you certainly don't need it then in the winter, and in the summer you would shut it off anyway. So it isn't necessary. Now, in an emergency, if you had these and you, your radiator got damaged and you still had coolant, or you were going up a hill and overheating, could you turn on the heaters and blast heat out of these and cool your engine a little bit? Sure, but that's an emergency situation, not something I would plan my whole build around. Just make sure that your cooling system is working properly. As far as this doghouse, usually they will have a small cover where you can access the oil dipstick and transmission dipstick. Transmission fluid is almost always changed while the engine is running and in neutral. And you pull that out and look, and it's always red, or almost always red. I think I always see red. Anyway, it'll be a little high right now because the engine's not running. And then your oil dipstick, usually it has this kind where you unscrew it and pull it out. And when you screw that tight, what it does is actually, see the threads there, it compresses this and expands it so that you don't get gases blowing out the top. There will be a blow-by hose on the bottom, and you don't want this stuff. If you had this loose, it's going to be blowing some exhaust gas out of the crankcase up here into this compartment, into the doghouse inside the bus. So anyway, you push that down and then screw it a little bit till it's just snug in there. These are your injector lines. I've got other videos on the engine itself. But this is how you check your transmission fluid and oil. And then, unlike your car, where you'll have a cap on top of the valve cover, which you can take off to add oil, generally you add it in this same place where you check the oil, and that's why the tube is bigger. And then the dog houses also have other latches, so you can open up this whole thing if you need just to work on the engine. Now this particular engine has a regular key start with a start position. Now the battery's disconnected. This one also has a manual shutoff. So on this particular bus, after you start the engine, to shut it off, you pull this out, and that shuts off, that kills the engine. If you try to start the engine with this out, it won't start. So you got to make sure that is pushed in, and you can't see what it says. It sort of says stop. You see it says engine stop barely, but no wonder people get confused. This is a throttle lock. So if I pull on that, you'll see it pulls the pedal down. Hop into the seat. Hey, I really appreciate your patience as I bounce around in here, by the way. So this is a throttle lock. So you can do high idle. Now, it's hard to pull on this because you got to push that button to release it, and then you're pulling against the spring tension of the pedal. But if I push the pedal down to high idle, now it's easy to pull that out, and then I can lock it. And then usually this is a vernier that lets you like crank it in and out just a little bit, and then you push this button to release it and push it back in. Here is the air brake. So you would push this in, but it won't stay. So if you do this, you push that in to release the brakes and it doesn't stay, it's because there isn't enough air pressure, which there isn't. So push that in, it doesn't stay. That means you've got no air pressure and it will not release the parking brakes. This particular bus has a traditional shifter. Buses do not generally, in fact, except for the little cutaway ones, I haven't seen any that have a park position. You'll have reverse and drive and neutral, and there's no park. And that means there's no parking pawl, the little ratchet thing on your transmission or drive line. When you put a car into park, it kind of locks your car there. That doesn't exist on a bus. So when you park your bus, you put it in neutral, and you have to pull this out and set your parking brake. If you don't, you just put it in neutral and walk away with your parking brake released. Your bus will roll away on you. Now, buses have the door controls like this there, but what if you want to stop? You open the door, and now you stop and you want to close the door because you're running into the gas station or something. So all the buses will have some kind of an override, and you may have to put the door in closed and then override it and push it open. Each bus, I've seen different ones, and it may not be a switch, it may be an actual valve. I've also seen the valves down there by the driver's left calf on that sidewall. But anyway, somewhere you will have an override, so when you get where you want and you want to close the door, you can push it closed. You'll find it's pretty common for the school district to add a piece of chain down here. I don't know if this one's got it. No, they actually had a tab broken off, but it's pretty common to find a piece of chain hanging down, just like, 3 or 4 links. And that's so that you can put a padlock through that chain and around this, just to lock it when you stop somewhere until you get something better. I should point these out because all of the emergency exits in a bus will have a sensor switch. So here's one. Bend that down and show you. And what it does is it grounds this line. So if you just cut this, depending upon whether it's normally open or normally closed, if you just cut wires, you might find that you have this incessant beeping and then your bus won't shift out of neutral or you can't release the parking brake. Same thing back here. I pulled this one open so you can see, but there's a switch and a buzzer. So this is the buzzer, that's the switch. So there's a power lead back here. Anyway, some of these you need to ground the wire out. Some of these you need to connect them together. It'll just depend on your particular bus, what you got to do to fix that. One other thing to point out while we're talking about these emergency exits and wiring, see a little wire there? That's connected up in here. And if somebody opens the emergency hatch, That will also set off the alarm and might disable your ability to turn off the parking brake or shift out of neutral. And then these, they get really brittle. You just pull down on it. It's hard to do one-handed. Can't do it. Anyway, these things get really brittle. Don't be surprised if they rip off. Like this one broke. They're just thin plastic. I mean, look how thin that is, and they get really brittle. And we've had some pretty impressive winds, so this just got ripped off in a windstorm recently. But if you take the hatch out and you don't deal with these wires up here, appropriately, it might prevent you from driving your bus. Now what about the dash up here? So it's pretty common that these are yellow. This one's a little odd that it's black. You may have a push button shifter if you've got one of the Allison World Transmission models. It'll generally have a push button, or it'll have a handle like this, but with a little LED display. Again, this is the engine shutoff. This is not very common, but you'll see it. Throttle adjust. This throws a lot of people off. Here is your headlight, parking and headlight switch. So all the way down on this one is headlights on. But the marker lamps are separate. You got panel lamps, you've got switch over here for marker lights. So a lot of these switches, they'll control the front heater, rear heater, defroster, things like that. And then you've got left and right wipers. Almost fell over. Every bus is a little different in that regard. And some of the hidden gems, especially on a front engine bus, are like this. This is right behind the windshield. And in here, that's where you check and fill your power steering fluid. So if your power steering is groaning, like you turn the corner and it's or groaning at you, and you've got a front engine bus and can't find where do you check your power steering fluid, it's hidden for you. So some buses have a regular key where you turn it and turn it to start, but this one doesn't. It's also pretty common to find a start button separate from the ignition switch. Sorry about the beeping. Anyway, it's pretty common to find a separate start button separate from the ignition switch. If you have a van cutaway bus, one of the short buses based on a van, you'll also have a doghouse. You may even have a hood out front, or like on the Vista school bus. Cute little school buses, but it's got a half a doghouse inside and a little hood outside, and it does make it a little challenging to work on. Anyway, you got to undo some clamps down here. Oh, sorry. Undo some clamps on either side. Sometimes they have additional bolts down here in the floor to take out. So take out those two bolts, undo the two clamps, one on either side, and then finagle this around your seats. This has a regular steering column key switch. And one important thing is the wait to start. Sorry about the light there. There. The wait to start. So that light on a diesel tells you that the glow plugs are heating up. And I did a video on what if your bus won't start and went into that in more detail. But it's important you follow that wait to start light, especially if it's cold. If it's warm out and you just parked it, got fuel, you can hop in, generally turn the key and go. But if it's at all cold, watch that wait to start light and don't try starting it until the wait to start light no longer says wait to start, if you followed that. And no, the black rails do not tell the fire department where to cut and the height of the back seats. I mean, if you look at any school bus, you'll see the seat back heights above that top rail, and they don't line up with the floor, or it might, That one actually does line up with the floor, so that stupid meme goes around, I think, every 4 weeks. I think it's by law. If you find something like this on your bus, that is for a block heater. So this allows you to plug an extension cord on these prongs and plug it into your house, and that warms the block of the engine, which makes it a lot easier to start when it's cold. I'll show you another one here in a minute. Sometimes you'll just find a cord hanging out the front or back of your bus underneath the engine, and again, that'll be a block heater. Here is another air tank, and this one has lines that run up to here, and I'll show you the other side because that makes it really easy to purge water out of the tanks. So these 3 fittings, remember those, I'll show you the other side in a minute, run to these lines here to the bottom of the tank. And this is, like I said, 1, 2, it's really 3 tanks all just partitioned. Older buses, or a lot of buses you'll find, they'll have 3 separate tanks. Here is the transmission and the drive shaft. This is, sorry, that is the muffler over there. So this is the transmission. This one is an Allison MD3060. You'll find a plate on the side of the transmissions. This one's on the other side, but you can identify that with the plate. If they're dirty, like this one is not, then you'll just have to get under there with a rag. If you find something like this under your bus with these fans, these are part of the air conditioning unit for the back of the bus. So how cool is that? This is the battery compartment on this bus, and it's got 3 Group 31 batteries. And then it's got the air drains. Those are those lines, and they run up. So you just turn it this way. Inline is open, and what it does is it purges then from the tank and then through this line out the bottom. So the wet is in the back, the rear, and the front tank. So anyway, you would just turn these all. If you're driving these every day, you know, on a route, you should do this every day. People dispute about whether it should be at the beginning or end of your shift, but just do it occasionally, because otherwise that water will sit in the tank and eventually it'll corrode out the bottom of the tank. But that's a nice system you might find. So let's take a look at the engine of a front engine conventional bus and the things in here. So this is your steering column. This is connected directly to the steering wheel, runs down to the steering gearbox, and this is hydraulically assisted, so power steering. So as you turn the steering wheel, it turns through the gears, moves this pitman arm forward and backward, connected to that trailing link or drag link. And back here, it's attached to the steering assembly. So your your steer tire pivots here. This is brake canister right there. So this pivots, and it is connected with that rod that ties both sides together. So it's conveniently called a tie rod. When you hear about tie rod ends or ball joints, they're down here. So the tie rod connects both sides together so that the tires turn in unison. This is your power steering fluid reservoir, and it does say on here, you know, check it with the engine running. This is the air compressor, and then there will either be a solid tube or, you know, like a steel braided line, the hot hose that comes off the air compressor. This air comes out pretty hot, and that's why as it's compressed, so it's heated. As it cools, it will condense moisture out of the air into the tank. And that's what you got to drain the tanks for. What did we talk about a little bit ago? What's this for? That is for checking your oil. Again, you unscrew it. It's got a regular dipstick. You fill through there too. This is the transmission fluid. And this one locks, clip it over. So this cable here goes through the firewall from the accelerator pedal, the gas pedal on a diesel, and it pulls the throttle linkage forward to rev the engine. The engine will have a governor which limits its speed. It's different from a gas engine. When you dump fuel into a gasoline engine, if you've got no load, it can over rev. Modern engines are computer controlled, but an old mechanical, just a carbureted gasoline engine will run as fast as it will run on the fuel it's given. But the diesel engines like this have a governor. So what you're really doing is adjusting the maximum speed of the governor. And if you have it at full throttle, even with no load on it, it will only rev to a certain amount and then stay at that. But anyway, this is an all mechanical engine, so there's no computer on this one. Super reliable, very durable and bulletproof, really. Let's go to the other side. My angle changed because I'm standing on about 3 feet of snow. We've had some crazy snow here. So this is your air filter canister, and this comes off, this band comes off, and you can pull, whoa, sorry, just fell through the snow, the crust. Anyway, inside here you'll see the filter element. So it draws in here, out the other side, and goes down to the turbocharger, which is that swirly thing down there. So that's the turbocharger. Here is the alternator, oil filter down there. This is the coolant reservoir. So this is where you would add coolant if it's a little low. That's the windshield washer reservoir. This is the back of the headlight module, which you'd access from the front. So, right here, nicely hidden, see that little red valve? That is the factory shutoff valve for the heater loop inside, the one I mentioned earlier. So this is intended so that in the summer you can shut this off. It goes one way or the other. There, it would turn sideways. So with the handle in line like that, now there is the ability, and hot coolant will flow through this. So with it in line like that, your heaters will work. When it's sideways, then they are blocked off, and that's something you want to do in the summer just so you don't heat yourself in the summer. These are your air conditioner lines to the air conditioning compressor. There are actually two of them, so there's a front and rear air conditioner, front and rear air conditioner in here, and this is where an HVAC tech would plug on to recharge the system. So high pressure and low pressure side. This thing is a filter indicator. So you'll see this change, and it will show you basically, it's really measuring the suction. So it's on this side of the filter. As your filter element gets plugged up, it takes more and more force. There's greater and greater suction, a greater vacuum on this side, and it changes the indicator in there. And so eventually you'll see that that thing is moved, and it gets up here to the red, where then it's time to change your air filter. These things here, you can get them at Napa or any truck supply place. And that's it for the engine. Again, this is, snow. Springs on the front, airbags on the back, like I showed you a little earlier. This is your front brake canister. And this is easy to see because this one is not like the rear brake, which has that spring brake chamber on the back, the parking or emergency brake. This one only works on air pressure. So when you step on the brakes, the brake pedal sends a small air line signal to a thing called a relay valve, which sends a greater volume of pressurized air into this chamber, which has a little rubber diaphragm, and it pushes on this piston here. So it pushes this out, which rotates this forward, and this arm here, which is called a slack adjuster, that arm there rotates forward and turns a thing in there called an S-cam. It's a little lobe that's got some teardrop shapes on it, kind of like the yin and yang symbol, I guess. And as it rotates, it pushes the pads out against the drum inside there. So anyway, this is a front brake on an air brake system. Super simple to work on, very reliable. So I did not want to get into which bus is better, front engine, rear engine, front engine flat nose, front engine conventional, puller. Chuck Cassidy did a great video on that. My friends Ivan and Sylvie LaCroix with the LaCroix Cruiser channel did a video on that. So what you pick is up to you. Mine is not to wonder why and all that. But I hope this was helpful. Again, this was super basic, but for somebody who's a brand new bus owner, I hope you gleaned a couple little things in here. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for sticking around. Let's go check out the water. We always get some water flowing through here, but I've never seen it that wide, and certainly it's never gotten up to the well. And it definitely never got up to my poor neighbor's garage. On the bright side, we can use the water. It'll fill up all the reservoirs and everything. Again, thanks for your patience. And since you're patient, here's one more Eva.